everyone. Thank you for joining us today for EEA's Education Series webinar. Today we will discuss the EEA's 2021 year-end review and the road to Web3. Today's call is being recorded and will be available to all attendees and the public on the EEA YouTube channel soon after today's presentation. The EEA enables organizations to adopt and use Ethereum technology in their daily business operations. The EEA empowers the Ethereum ecosystem to develop new business opportunities, drive industry adoption, and learn and collaborate with one another. We welcome any and everyone to join and become a part of our global community. At this time, we are pleased to introduce our moderator, Ken Fromm.
Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending. My name is Ken Fromm. I'm the EEA Director of Education and Development, and I am pleased to have with me Evan Van Ness and Mark Mercuri. Evan Van Ness is the founder of Starbloom Ventures, early stage fund investing in the future of Web3. He is also the early and long-term publisher of Week in Ethereum News, and also a Texas maximalist. Mark is leads the QBS business unit at Consensus, where he leads a portfolio of blockchain services and developer tooling. Prior to Consensus, he was in leadership roles at several startups, as well as 18 years at Microsoft, where he launched multiple blockchain services and pro-code, low-code, no services. So why don't we start out and give a little bit more detail about not only your backgrounds, but also your origin stories with crypto and with Ethereum. So Evan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. My origin story is that I am sort of libertarianish and I like to read things on the internet. So, I'd seen some of these digital cash projects come and go, and then I'm it's been, over 10 years, but I'm pretty sure I had Satoshi's white paper when he published it, a few months before the chain launched. I kind of opened it and was like, yeah, I don't know, whatever. There's been a million of these like libertarian fantasies about their own, like digital gold, digital cash. But then, it actually happened. And, I sort of kept pace up with, sort of watching it. Eventually, I realized that although I'm never been a Bitcoiner, I was realizing that the technology was transformative because it, allowed you to do things on without having to trust people. And so when Vitalik started talking about Ethereum, I instantly got it. The interesting thing though was that, I had been following Vitalik's writing for, years because he was writing for Bitcoin magazine. And I thought he was this, 55-year-old Russian PhD. And it turns out he was a 17-year-old in a basement in Canada. So that was sort of a funny thing that I hadn't realized. So that's, that's basically how I got into this crypto thing.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, so as Ken mentioned, I was at Microsoft for a while. I got a sabbatical back in 2015 and decided, every day I was going to do something that I always wanted to do, and said I want to be a Bitcoin miner one day. Turned my home office into a sauna, really overclocked my machine. Really annoyed my wife, but fell in love with blockchain technology. When I came back from sabbatical, they had a really cool job lined up for me to go work on smart stadiums and travel to sports stadiums all over the world. And I said, no, I actually want to go after this blockchain thing. They thought I was crazy at the time, but really invested a lot of time there. Started off working with just a number of customers, understanding the scenarios of what they wanted to go build with it, and working with folks all over the world, and started initially building a tool that made it really easy for them to really see what prototype and build things really quickly. And then I was asked to lead the product team where we launched Ethereum, specifically Quorum, as a service for folks inside of Microsoft's Azure cloud. Built an NFT service and shipped it 2 years ago. When I was there, it got created after I left, as well as developer tools and things like that. And so a lot of my passion is, and I was in the executive briefing center at Microsoft in Redmond. And so, lots of people had lots of bad ideas about blockchain, but the ones that were good were really, really good. And they were fundamentally going to make people's lives better. And so I was very excited about that. Took a brief stint to learn low code, no code, because when I looked at blockchain, the big thing for me was not just that I was passionate about it, but how do we let as many people as possible be successful with and bring their ideas to it. So anybody with an idea be a blockchain developer. And so I did that for a couple of years, launched another service for Microsoft in that low code space, and then called Joe Lubin and said, Joe, I haven't been to church in a while, but I haven't lost religion. I think it's time for me to come back to the blockchain space, and joined Consensus about 5 months ago. And I'm very happy to be back in the space and working in Ethereum.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into the year in review, and then the later half we'll talk about future and the road to Web3. But when we look at 2021, it seems that Ethereum has made major strides in acceptance and visibility, and so talk about what you think in terms of other blockchains and networks and ETH killers and sort of general, when people think about blockchain, has it changed to Ethereum, or are we still in this multi-chain, multi-L1 world?
So I guess people think that I'm an Ethereum maximalist, so I guess I'll go first here. I'm definitely not an Ethereum maximalist, but I do think that like there is, what's great about this technology is that it allows you to like trust someone, or to not have to trust someone, right? And so like because that we have decentralization that makes that possible. I would say that like Ethereum is basically the only chain that has solved decentralized scaling. So basically every other chain out there that has quote unquote greater throughput does that by having greater centralization. And to me, that's not what makes it exciting. And of course, Ethereum does this by doing rollups, which is the idea of putting the data of these transactions on chain, but then moving the execution to the rollup chain. And I think it's a really powerful primitive that is, like the rollups are now live, and that's a thing that is really like one of the major themes of this year in my view. And they are, the future is here but unevenly distributed. Rollups are unevenly adopted at the moment, but like the throughput for decentralized scaling is out there, and it's possible to do Visa-like, transaction numbers of a payment network of like, the 2,000 to 3,000 transactions per second with a rollup. So that's really cool. And I think that's like looking back in the future of like what happened this year, I think that's going to be by far one of the most transformative things.
Mark?
Yeah, so I would largely echo that. I see the world as one of many connected chains with Ethereum sort of at the center, and multiple layer twos as we're seeing right now. Rollups are fantastic, and so I do see that evolution. I know I think people get paid for clicks, and so Ethereum killer is always good for probably a day's meals for certain folks out there. And the thing is, I would say competition and new ideas make everything better. And so I would say, for everything that comes out there that says it's going to be an Ethereum killer or those sorts of things, they're bringing ideas to the table. Some of them have trade-offs that really are not great. Some of them are great ideas that can be adopted in Ethereum, and there can be interop with those things as well. So I don't know that it's a zero-sum game, but I definitely think that the Ethereum is sort of the center of the universe, and where a lot of the innovation is happening.
Okay, great. So multi-chain world and multi-layer world. So with that, let's talk about the layers then. So give a little context for people that may not know, who wants to describe like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, and then dive into some of the things around layer 2. So maybe Evan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So layer 1 is usually what we call the Ethereum mainnet. So it's basically the base blockchain, for Ethereum, that is the mainnet. Layer 2 is things that are built on top of that have trustless transactions. So there's been a long history of like, what is layer 2? A lot of people would try to promote their sidechain as a layer 2, but if you have a multi-sig that is your bridge to Ethereum, like you are not a layer 2. Like that is not trustless, that is trusted, because the assets are really held by that multi-sig, that M of N number of people. Rollups is the idea that on L2, you have a trustless transaction. And because you've moved this transaction or this execution off chain, but kept the data on chain, you have much greater throughput. So that's L2. And, L3, I think some people, is, sort of up for debate in the nomenclature game. You could say it's sort of like the channels that people are using to move between chains and like between rollups and make that a more seamless user experience, which I think is somewhat still being built, but there are, channels out or, products out there using channels, using various atomic rollup or atomic transaction kind of deals that are, pretty good user experiences. So.
Got it. Okay, Mark, do you have any differing views on that in terms of layer 2 and scalability?
No, I mean, layer 2 clearly provides that scale that folks are looking for, and can also help address some of the cost concerns for certain types of transactions, which are quite good. And then, as we were starting to talk about, just like bridging is going to become increasingly more important as we go in, as you have more chains being able to bridge contracts between them and have interactions. Are going to be increasingly more important as we go into next year and beyond.
Can you talk a little more about what is a bridge and sort of a couple different flavors of bridges? I think probably people hear about bridges and don't really understand what that means. So what does it mean to bridge or to wrap tokens?
Yeah, I mean, let me, instead of going, because there's 3 varieties and we could probably spend the whole time just going through the different nuances. But I think at the core, you have multiple layers of chains, for example, where the same asset may be used in different contexts, and you want to be able to have interactions that reflect the state or things that happen that sort of span those chains. And so just being able to make sure that it's not this thing happens and this thing reacts and this other thing does this thing over here, where it's sort of this disconnected async pattern where, especially for certain types of assets, bad things can happen. Really those ledgers are connected via a bridge that will connect at the contract level.
So you're locking tokens on one side, and then you're creating synthetics on another side, and you're doing it with the proper cryptography and math to make sure that there's not a double spend, and that the state is synced up. So it's made it, whether you're exchanging between layer 1s, so to speak, or just between layer 1 and layer 2, what you're doing is doing some protocols to make sure that there's not a double spend. Okay. All right. So let's go into, I guess, DeFi, and I guess talk about what it is and interesting projects that have really gotten you excited about decentralized finance. So, Evan, since you're the decentralized maximalist, why don't you talk about some of that?
Yeah, sure. So decentralized finance is the idea that you can basically replicate the services of a bank on chain. And so you can control your assets instead of, a bank controlling your assets and maybe capriciously seizing your assets or deciding not to bank you, or frankly, just being terrible. Like, frankly, I have a lot of experiences with banks just being terrible. Like a large bank, I called, I reopened an account there and they kept locking my account every day for a week when I tried to transfer $25,000 into this account. And so I spent, over 10 hours on the phone over the course of a week, every day with them saying like, can you reopen my account? And they'd be like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have gotten locked. Like every day, the same thing. And eventually I just gave up. And, that's like in the US where, our banking system is much, relatively good. But of course, I have ties to Argentina where they have a long history of, basically the government just deciding to like steal their money through the banking system. And then of course through inflation as well. So, DeFi is the idea that, I can basically put things on chain, whether it be a dollar that is either held in deposit by, a trusted institution, like, so that's a USDC, or, maybe a somewhat less trusted institution like Tether. Or, there's some sort of synthetic way to create that value, like DAI, where you basically over collateralize ETH, and then it's you can represent it as $1 by DAI. So one DAI equals $1. I think these are all really powerful things. I've seen it in Argentina, where there are capital controls, and Argentines generally have a religious faith in the dollar that like Americans do not. And they want dollars and they don't want pesos, because of course, every Argentine, no matter what their lifespan is, has seen multiple times where the government has inflated away, their savings. So they want to get dollars in whatever form possible, but there's also, there's always capital controls happening. They often want to dox you if you want to buy more than like a couple $100 per day. You have to like go in and like put your documents into a database saying that you bought dollars, and it's like in cash, which generally might mean that you're then like putting it in under a mattress, which means that like government bureaucrats will leak your data so that thieves will come steal all your money under the mattress. So, I think it's great that like there are savings technologies for people around the world that can, be held outside of, banking systems that are often terrible. So I guess you said maybe talk about a couple of things. One of that is like there's just these dollar coins. Another one is that I think is really interesting is called Pool Together, where maybe this isn't the most enterprising thing, but it is a no loss lottery where they put these dollar coins into, I guess everyone calls them stable coins. I like dollar coins, but they put them into a savings account, like the DeFi equivalent of a savings account, like Compound or Aave. And then every week they raffle off through some randomness on chain to a winner. And so basically you get the lottery, but without losing your savings. So you can't lose. You can only win. If you're a finance guy like me, I sort of think it like, well, you are losing the time value of your money, but I think a lot of other people find it to be a really interesting idea. And there are things around the world like that, that replicate this.
So Mark, a couple of protocols, there's a couple of things that have awakened you to the possibilities of DeFi.
Well, I'll tell you, before I came back to join Consensus, I did an experiment. I watched in the US, there's a show called CNBC, and there's a famous commentator. And I said, if Ethereum is mentioned 5 times out of like the next 10 days, then I know it's kind of gone mainstream. And they've mentioned it, I think 8 or 9 times during that period. I really do want to echo what Evan talked about, because I've had a chance to work with lots of people all over the world, meet with lots of customers all over the world. And, I have the good fortune to be in the United States, but there are a lot of places in the world where I have a friend, Evan, who had the same situation. He got his Amex bill was billed in US dollars, but he was Latin America, and his currency inflation was out of control. And so he would have to go buy suitcases full of dollars from people to make sure he could pay his bill and not take a loss and things like that. And so I do think that there's there's a level of equity, more equitable and fair opportunities for folks that they can't leverage in certain parts of the world, which I think is very very interesting. And the other thing I think is key is just the ability that people can do with, it removes all the things that blockchain does. It provides transparency. It provides, by removing intermediaries, it can reduce costs and things like that. But I think just the level of innovation where anybody with an idea can go out and try these things to the best of not running afoul of government regulators in their particular country and things like that, to me is the most exciting thing. And even some of the most basic sort of transactions you might take for granted in a place like the US for banking, there are people doing really innovative things like that, which Evan was just talking about as well. So lots of really interesting innovation that's happening across the board.
Any in particular that that you've? I know that some others have mentioned Olympus DAO and the bonding curve that they're doing, or obviously like Uniswap and other decentralized exchanges. Are there things that bring to mind, some new potential for these decentralized protocols?
Well, I'm a little biased. I kind of like what we're doing with swaps inside of MetaMask, and some interesting things that we're doing with folks there. But yeah, I don't want to call it any individual one, but clearly the ones you've just mentioned are quite good. There's more stuff on the way. There are some things I think in the DAO space that are particularly interesting, and some things that are coming soon and folks are looking at that I think are bringing finance to other aspects of things that people do, like software and other things that I think are going to be pretty exciting.
Great. Well, we'll give you a chance to pitch the swaps and also talk about DAOs in the Web3 portion. But let's just, I guess, maybe then move on to NFTs. And why don't you just continue on NFTs and brief description on what they are, as well as what you think both near term and long term.
Yeah, so I'm really I launched a token service a couple of years ago, so I was probably an early adopter and pretty biased on this. I'm very excited to see where they are today. I bought tickets to the new Spider-Man movie a couple days ago, and I'm getting an NFT from them, which is incredible to see that sort of mainstream that AMC Theaters is in this. DC Comics was in it, and so for me, when I was at Microsoft, a lot of my career there was in emerging technologies, and so I get excited when stuff is sort of breaking through to the mainstream. And so when comic books and movies and other things like that, musical artists, of course, Damien Hirst, popular artists, lots of really great stuff going on there, and of course, things going on with different things in popular culture, as well as whether it's interesting things that people are doing right now in OpenSea and sort of generative NFTs. Those are kind of fun. And I've seen people, we're talking largely about digital collectibles right now in many cases. In my time at Microsoft, I saw people using this for lots more than that in the real world. And so I'm excited about collectibles and things like that, bringing it mainstream. And then I'm excited about the trillions of assets in all over the world that will be sort of represented by NFTs in the years to come. But this is what I love about this, is because Spider-Man isn't scary. Batman isn't scary, I guess, unless you're the Joker or whatever. But it really is making these things much more accessible to folks in the mainstream. And so the fact that my mom knows what an NFT is to me is a fun and thinks it's cool, is a fundamentally good thing for, I think, blockchain in general. And in the space, just I imagine other companies in the space, we're in the space, there's just an obscene amount of interest in it right now, which to me is just super exciting. It really is sort of in the center of the universe in terms of cultural folks right now.
That's great. Evan?
Yeah, I mean, NFTs, I think in sort of the popular parlance, has come to mean, digital art. And I think it's neat that, you've seen that people do value like the work that, has been done on digital art, and they haven't necessarily had a chance to, see that until now. But of course, like, as Mark sort of touched on, NFT is a token standard, and it can represent anything that is not, like a ticket or, a whole lot of things. And I think what's, neat about these is that, like, composability on chain, by doing it on mainnet or on a rollup or even on a side chain to some degree, enables you to have a level of composability that you can do interesting things with these token standards, whatever you are representing on chain. And sometimes there's a level of trust, right? Like, if I'm selling a ticket to an entrance on chain, I can put that up in, different ways, maybe. There is a level of trust that, of course, that I'm actually going to let you into my event based on this ticket. But, it's cool that, maybe it's transparent, right? And it's composable, and you can go out and do all sorts of things with it, whether, sell insurance on it natively, or, even fractionalize it, which, we've seen people take these digital works and turn them into, fractionalized. So people buy fractions of a Beeple thing, which, that's not me. And I'm not really into art or digital art, but I think it's kind of neat to see that, while it can look like a crazy sort of like casino from the outside, it's also neat that people want to own things. And my kids get it more than I do, I think, in some ways.
But what I love too is that, when you're getting an asset, you're going to have a wallet that's associated with that, right? And so now you're now a player in the ecosystem. And so now you can go do other things. So that first step for folks into the world is there. And now it's that friction point for them to go start, or the thing that might make them hesitant to go something is already sort of done. But the something someone younger than me described it, because I was talking about NFTs, and they're like, oh, is it kind of like sticker books when I was a kid? Like I would get these things and I would try to buy these packs of cards or stickers, and I would go put them in the book, and it was really a thing for me to go get, and aren't that many of them. I said, yeah, it was kind of like that. And so like, it was funny, like someone really young sort of made the collectible argument much better than I did, referencing to sports stickers that they had for a particular European football team.
And I think it's great when we start seeing like video games really start to take advantage of the fact that like you could put something from, like you could use an item from a different video game in your video game. And like, that's what I mean, by composable. And I think we are, like it's taken a long time. This was actually a vision. I think Mark was probably there at DevCon 1, where, a friend of mine got on stage and talked about like the idea of, having your virtual junk like shared between many different things. Like the things that you earn in a game could be actually yours, and then you could use them in various different games, and other video game designers could use your NFT for in their game. I think that's a great idea. And frankly, I'm starting to ask myself, like, why do I play Rocket League when they don't give me an NFT that I can like go use in some other different game or sell or whatever, So
the thing that was interesting to me was that Twitter validated the NFTs. If you put a CryptoPunk as your photo, they would validate that you were actually the owner of that. So that to me showed the power of NFT. That's not just a matter of, I can just right click, copy, paste, and I can own that. It's like, no, you don't, because it's registered on the blockchain, and there'd be validation and verification of that ownership. The other thing that was interesting, I thought, was the ENS in their token drop. Basically ENS is an NFT, and they looked into the wallets and they did various parameters on, if you've extended or renewed and things, and they were able to, using that data, to be able to then reward with a token drop to the owners of those NFTs. And so I think that, relate into some of the derivative or, version 2 versions of NFTs and what you can do. And then they're not just collectible art. There's actually, because they're on the chain and they're associated with accounts, that you can do a lot of things and reward holders in that manner. Okay, so let's move on to energy and consumption and talk about that, because that was a big issue this year in terms of blockchain consumption and energy consumption, and how green blockchain is. Before we get to that, I just want to mention that the EA is going to put on a sustainability workshop next week on the 16th. So if you're interested, Brittany, our secretary, will put the link into the chat, but you can also see it on the events page off of the EA website. But that'll be a 90-minute workshop on sustainability and all the great things that are being done. But where are we now with energy usage and resource consumption in Ethereum, and where are we going? And does that matter? Is it a big issue?
So yeah, go for it.
So I know with some enterprise customers, especially ones that have large market caps and things like that, they get very concerned about it, and so they see it almost like, hey, am I going to break into jail by going to do this? Here's the good news is what I've seen is, because invariably a lot of the companies out there don't necessarily run their own data centers anymore. They're using the cloud. And so what I've seen, at least one cloud provider did, I'll give a plug for them, it was Microsoft. They they actually buy carbon credits, and you can actually get a report to see how much that you're using. And so there's lots of like fear and uncertainty and doubt, FUD about this. And what's nice is that depending on who you pick to do your hosting, they may be buying carbon credits in addition to whatever other people are doing. And so like the actual impact, I think for one customer that we talked to, was the equivalent of running like 2 propane gas tanks you'd use for your backyard grill over the course of the year. And that's much easier to describe to someone as opposed to, hey, you're destroying the earth. And it's like, well, actually, it's really not that much when we look at sort of the things that we're doing. But I think people always gravitate to the worst case scenarios, and they lump all blockchain technology together, which is clearly not the right thing to do. But I think we'll see more in terms of reporting that'll make it easier for people to understand that. And then the technology will just get better, and the topologies we'll have will make it better as well.
Right, and the difference between BTC versus ETH1 versus ETH2 is dramatically different. And like you said, they're not even in the same galaxy in terms of energy usage. Evan, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I think that right now, I think it's hard to make the case that Ethereum mainnet is not very wasteful energy-wise because it uses proof of work, and like Bitcoin does. And the Ethereum community has always recognized this as an issue. In fact, I remember Vitalik writing some Bitcoin magazine articles from before Ethereum was an idea about moving to proof of work, or moving to proof of stake, and how it would be a thing. And we are basically on the cusp of that happening in a few months, when we turn off proof of work and only use proof of stake. And I'm extremely excited for that. It will cut down the energy use of Ethereum by like a good estimate is 99.95%. So literally, magnitudes and magnitudes of energy reduction. And I think that's fantastic and a moral imperative for Ethereum. And I think like nobody involved with Ethereum would want to, have proof of work be used long-term, because I just think like the energy use is crazy. And I'm really excited that we're turning off proof of work and doing so in a decentralized way. Like there are other proof of stake chains, quote unquote, I say proof of stake, but I would say that all of those have, some centralization issues, whereas Ethereum has taken, groundbreaking cryptography and BLS signatures, which has led to a level of decentralization in staking being possible that wasn't before. And I'm, super excited that we're going to put that into production soon, trademark soon.
That's great.
But I think it is a relatively simple change, and I'm really excited for that. I mean, we're going to use these staking that we've had running for a year. Like we've had this staking chain coming to consensus on itself for a year, basically flawlessly. Magnitudes more decentralized than any other quote unquote proof of stake chain. And we're just going to start feeding in the payload of the block production from these current mainnet into the staking chain. And so it will come to consensus on this payload of, the block instead of itself. So, it's a pretty simple technological thing. Easy for me to say when I'm not coding it, of course.
That's right. All right. So before we move on to the future and the road ahead, give me a couple thoughts about this year in Ethereum, and what struck you as most important milestone. Like you mentioned one of them when you look back, that people will remember 2021 for this type of milestone. So who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll fill the silence. So I think, with NFTs, I think that was a fairly big deal this year, just the momentum they had, starting with people, and then it just became, I think at that dollar value, it drew a lot of attention, and then really sort of helped jumpstart the space, as well as a couple of other projects that we talked about earlier in the call. So that to me was quite good. I think the other thing is not the stuff that you see, that everyone sees, but the stuff that I'm seeing, just the types of people that are now sort of flooding into the space. And so I think there's like a next wave of folks that are coming from cloud companies and different backgrounds that are coming into the space and applying cloud patterns to some of the things that we're doing in different places. And I'm seeing it's the old like Reese's peanut butter cup chocolate and peanut butter better together. So we're seeing people that really aren't blockchain people, but more cloud people. And then we're seeing blockchain people coming together and sort of sharing ideas. I was in a great working session yesterday with some folks, and we came up with something I think is going to be pretty transformational, but it really is just bringing like more perspectives into the space. Where I think a lot of folks in certain categories might have been dismissive of blockchain in the early days. They're realizing, hey, maybe I was looking at this the wrong way, and those sorts of things. I had someone the other day who was really senior. He's like, you know what, I don't understand the space, but I know it's important, and I want to be part of whatever this is going to be. And so I see lots of folks entering the space that are, and I think the pandemic helped drive this, is hey, life is short. I want to make a dent in the universe, and everything I'm hearing says this has the chance to change the world. And so I think there's a whole bunch of folks from all walks of life that are coming into blockchain that I'm really just excited to see where they sort of drive that and the ideas that they build on this next year.
Great. Evan, do you want to talk about 2 milestones that struck you as important?
Yeah, sure. So one I think is EIP 1559, which is a bit of a game changer. It is, it basically the idea was to make it a more predictable gas fee prices to sort of make the chain easier to use, which is important for rollups as well. But it also helps ETH be valuable, which is important for a proof of stake chain. And it does that by reducing the supply of ETH. And so, the issuance of ETH went down to it's been negative over weeks. So there's more ETH being burned than issued to miners. I think that's, going to be seen as something that is transformational, in the future, that happened this year. The second thing I would say, which isn't, it isn't entirely new to this year, but I think it's become really a thing this year, is giving out tokens to your users and, sort of exiting to community. And a good example, of course, maybe slightly trite, but I think we've seen it, and it is true. I was on Facebook in the early days. Zuckerberg, he started it at Harvard, and then he went down the list of US News and World Reports, and that's how they opened it to people at different campuses. And I had already graduated from Rice, but I was relatively recent graduate, so my friends got me onto it. And you had to use your college email, which I still had for some reason. And it's a very early user of Facebook, and I got nothing for it, right? Whereas it all that value accrued to the shareholders and to Zuckerberg. Whereas in Web3, we have community ownership, and it accrues to the users by giving early users a stake in the system. And we saw that with ENS recently, where they gave out tokens to the people that were using their .eth handles. And I think that's a fantastic thing that is really kind of bloomed into fruition, that in the long term will be seen as significant. It wasn't cool that literally all of Web2 got went to a small group of people. All the value went there. And in Web3, it is, it democratizes that.
Yeah, and I think that I think that you're correct. I think that ENS airdrop surprised and delighted a lot of people, and I think it pointed the way. I think I saw a question in the chat that maybe we'll get to, but Mark, they were asking about the MetaMask airdrop, token airdrop. So actually, I'm kidding. That was just me. But all right, so let's shift.
I'm sorry, Ken. I can't hear you.
I figured as much. So let's talk about shift into the future in Web3. Chris Dixon has written a lot. Actually, we at the EA have talked about this shift from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3. Does anyone want to jump into, when you talk about a transformational shift to, to the people you talk to, the C-levels, Mark? How do you talk about Web3, and how do you describe it as do you describe it as transformational?
Yeah, and I've had lots of conversation over the last several years. Now it's sort of coming to fruition about what Web3 can do for them. At the crux of it is I say, at the end of the day, I said, don't talk about blockchain. If you could add trust and transparency to things in your business, what could you do better, faster, cheaper? Where could you go? And so for me, there's very sad stories about like people unable to get insurance in Africa because of levels of complexity and process and data sharing and reconciliation and costs and things like that, where they can now, and I've worked with folks on models where they could do automated insurance. So many people could get insurance that would work automatically and with the testable data and things like that. So there's things like that. There are places where people's business models will fundamentally change. There's one company I talked to where it'll just, it would basically flip upside down, where they would sort of provide tokens for some of the things that they do today and give those to people that can be leveraged and sort of totally flip their business model upside down. In terms of what they would do versus what their customer would do, but and what they would attest to and how they would tokenize certain things. So I see when I talk to folks, a lot of times, honestly, Ken, they'll say, I don't know why we do that. So part of it is just like rethinking like why they do stuff in the first place, especially if they've been around for more than 5 years. And then when they start looking at it, they can make things go much faster. They can upend their business models. They can go into new markets. They can mitigate risk. I mean, we have some companies where just super basic, Evan talked about bank accounts. For the last company I was at, which is a $1 trillion company, it could take 6 months to open a bank account in some countries, right? So like, think about like how that impacts your ability and your agility to do business. That's just opening a bank account, right? And so there are so many things out there where people can, if there are enterprises that are on the call, that you can streamline what you're doing. And the other thing that's happening in parallel is with the NFTs being mainstream and with people doing things with MetaMask and other tools, that you have a populace that's now sort of demanding it and expecting it. And so the training you might have to do for folks has really been done in many segments. And so I think the convergence this next year is going to be super exciting.
That's great. So Evan, how do you talk about how do you talk about Web3 or where we are, where we're going, and what's been the most successful response you've gotten from converting anyone?
Yeah, to me, Web3 is about ownership. So, when I was growing up, I had a Mac in my early days because my father was a developer. So this was the 80s. And then, the information came in and we networked the information age of the web. We networked these computers together and you could read things, right? So the early web was just, you could read things. And, of course, that was transformational. The information age, like I remember growing up and, we had a Mac, but we didn't have encyclopedias. So funny thing about my parents' values, I guess. But like literally like the encyclopedia was like the source of truth for everything, because that was the only way you could get knowledge outside of like going to a library, and then the web changed all that and like democratized access to information. Then Web 2 was about not just reading like the early web was, but also writing. And, so with Ajax and asynchronous JavaScript being added, you could also write to that database. And I think Gmail was one of the great early examples of, like, not only could I like, without having to reload this page, like I could write and, I could read and write. And, we saw great things happen, sometimes not so great, but, Facebook and Twitter and all of these things where you could read and write. And then Web3 is about actually being able to own, because decentralization makes it possible that I can own something without depending on the government, or without depending on a bank, or, without depending on a centralized server. And not even in a paranoid sense, but it also, because you have access to this worldwide distributed computer that's decentralized, you can own something without permission and you can just do it. And so that's the way I describe it to people. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's working a lot more lately than it did in, sort of the bear market 2018, 2019 days.
Have you converted anybody? Have you converted people in terms of the aha moment of understanding the uses versus the rise in price? I mean, obviously the rise in price converts a lot of people, but what about the aha moment about people finally getting some of these concepts that you've been talking about?
Yeah. For me, I mean, I actually don't talk about this stuff that much in my everyday life. I don't know. I'm happy to talk about it when people want to, but probably more of where I have talked about it is, in Argentina, where, it's trying to explain like, hey, you can get access to dollars and hold it in a savings account without having to depend on your bank and without, your government knowing. And, that's a really powerful and game-changing thing for them. So yeah, that's probably, I sort of referenced that before, but that's probably where I've spent more of my time, evangelizing the ownership possibilities of Web3.
What about composability in terms of, because to me, I agree with the ownership, read, write ownership, but also composability in terms of smart contracts and open contracts and open standards, and the ability to basically, do things with almost like a Legos or building blocks. Does anyone want to touch, Mark, do you want to touch on that in terms of, does that come in conversation when you talk with businesses?
Yeah, so it's actually a place I spent a lot of time on, and there's some writings that I've done on the space for a bit. And so the key thing is everyone wants that I talk to, they say they want composability, and I think that they do. The ability to have these Legos that connect up together is important. The key thing there is what I was doing with customers in the space is, what are the sets of interfaces that you can make sure that you've got the most up-to-date information, so you can make the best decisions possible. And so suppose you have a contract that basically sorts out what my credit score is, right? And instead of, the chain is immutable, but I can go ahead and make an update and change the current value of the property, right? And so maybe that property on that contract represents a credit score for me. Someone references that, and then they go ahead and issue a loan or other things. There's a set of butterfly effects that can happen as a result of that. But what if Johnny, and Johnny's always the bad guy in my stories, he transposed two numbers. And so now my credit score isn't what it was. And he makes a new transaction and he updates the state on the ledger. But how do we make sure that everybody that took a dependency on that information now is subscribed, has an update to that, and can automatically execute the logic to reevaluate that information? And so there are things like that where for that level of composability, it's kind of important to have sort of the standard interfaces there, so you can sort of publish and subscribe on the chain to these sorts of things. But when you do that, though, it's incredibly powerful. But it's one of those things that when folks first start doing it, as is the case when folks usually start doing something for the first time, they don't necessarily think about that. And so I try to spend a lot of time when I focus on folks and the things that are not just getting it out the door. It's like, all right, if you're going to put it into public versus permission, where you can rip down the network and restart it if you want to. Like let's game everything out here. Like, what's going to happen when you need to make a change, or what happens if this dependency changes? Like, how does that work today? Okay, well, in this new environment, how would that work? But it's not particularly difficult. It's just the biggest thing is just making sure people understand like the dependency trees that they have. And ideally, if you do this the right way as a standard, like the last thing you took a dependency on should basically give you should flow through all the dependencies they took all the things they took a dependency on, so on and so forth. But yeah, straightforward to do. But it is something that folks don't always ask about or don't necessarily think through. But once you've got it, it works great.
Okay. Well, let's bring it into 2022. And so what should be people looking at, paying attention to this next year? Obviously, it's nice to talk about 5 years out, the strategic implications of Web3, but what are some of the things people should be, paying attention to, putting on their radar, and then what sources should they be following, and obviously put in the chat how to follow you guys, what to update where you're at, what you do, and how to follow you. So Evan, do you want to talk about sort of what you think for 2022, what's going to be important?
Yeah, I think the continued adoption of rollups is going to be really, really important. I think Ethereum's going to turn off proof of stake probably in the first quarter or second quarter of the year. I think that's going to be really important. I'm really excited about those things. I think we're going to see zero knowledge applications in all sorts of crazy ways, because it's a crazy primitive that we haven't really touched on here, but it's really a game changer for this technology We're going to see, zero knowledge versions of the EVM put into rollups in different ways, where they're applying the cryptography magic at the opcode level, at the IR level, at the solidity level. And I think those are all, maybe things that some enterprises won't be first adopters of, but it's good to have on your radar, because like it's a game changer in terms of scalability and privacy. And those are all super exciting things. And it's happening, and it's happening ahead of schedule, like all the zero knowledge stuff, like faster than people thought possible.
So basically the Ethereum infrastructure is rapidly improving, and just pay attention because things are happening quick. So Mark, you mentioned DAOs as being something. Are there other, can you briefly mention that, and also just talk about any other things that people you think should be paying attention to in particular in 2022?
Yeah, so I think there's three things. Evan talked about one, which is the infrastructure, right? So between you're going to have ETH2, you're going to have rollups, you're going to have bridges, and so this world of connected chains is getting much more in full force. With DAOs, I think people have talked about DAOs for a number of years. I think we're, and hopefully I don't regret this, but I would say next year might be the year of the DAO. I think that there's enough people, enough places talking about this and doing some really innovative stuff. I'm very excited about something I was in a meeting yesterday that I'd love to talk about. I can't just yet, but it really could do some really like change the world type stuff if we get the models right. And I think and that leads into the next thing, which is developers, right? And so one is, DAOs will be important. You'll see things where it's going to open up new opportunities. You're going to have it, sort of continue on some of the trends you saw this year. You'll see things, whether it's governance or doing really interesting things for participants that I think are going to be really exciting. And then it's going to be developers. And so with as much interest as there is, I think the opportunity next year is how do we let anybody with an idea be a developer? And so I think what that's going to translate to is you're going to see folks moving up the stack. You'll see more folks in the space offering like primitives, so financial primitives that might represent like payments or assets or those sorts of things. And they're programming that because it's much easier for people who are new to the space. And then even moving up into like the low code, no code space, where you're now letting like Bob and Jane in accounting or folks that have, because people have great ideas, right? I mean, ultimately what you're doing is you're leveraging the technology to solve some interesting, create a new model or evolve a new model, that sort of stuff. And those people may not always be traditional programmers. And so they can start prototyping stuff out or pair up with other folks. And so I think it's going to be a mixture of infrastructure, DAOs, and developers. I think you're going to see more developers. I think you're going to see more tools for them that make it easier to really expand what that definition of what a developer is.
Yeah, so because right now, I mean, with in trading, if they missed a comma instead of a period, then there could be $1 billion trade going awry. Now, if you make a public versus private variable, things could go awry. So obviously, there needs to be better, easier ways to be safe with crypto contracts and protocols. We'll have a little time for questions. So if people want to put questions we got a couple in the Q&A and the chat. But in the meantime, what are some sources? Obviously, there's Week in Ethereum News, correct? I said that correct, right? What are some other sources that people should be looking at, that you look at? How do you stay on top of all the things in this space? So a couple tips to our audience on that. And then we'll go to the questions.
Yeah, there's a blog someone writes under a pseudonym, is it Polynaya? That's quite good. That talks about a lot of things that I sort of touched on, sort of multiple chains interconnected and where things are going. I think it's a great and consistent sort of blog in terms of where things are going and good thoughts to be looking at, for sure.
Evan?
Yeah, that's a great one. I am sticking that link in the chat as we speak. I think I'm getting it. There we go. Yeah, I'm a pretty self-referential person. So to me, it's like Week in Ethereum News is everything that you need to know. Yeah, outside of getting the real fire hose of Twitter if you're careful about who you follow. You know, you can really get good information there. You know, there's some good podcasts out there as well, depending on what you're into. I'm not personally somebody that likes to listen. I like to read. So, you know, I don't know. That's why I like email newsletters.
Yeah, if it's like the EA, like if you are looking for podcasts, Bankless is pretty good. And then there's the A16Z podcast had a couple things recently that were pretty good. They had one on like play to earn in gaming and things like that. And so some of the episodes they have on there are pretty good also. But really sort of more explaining like what's the opportunity and what's and what folks are doing in the space and how to think about certain things, which is kind of interesting if that's not your world, because a lot of times these models, whether you see them in gaming, could apply to other things as well. And so it's usually a good spark for folks to start thinking about stuff.
All right. All right. So in terms of questions, we've got one, I think, a request for connecting you with somebody to connecting you with consensus. So I'll forward that to you. We'll forward that to you in email, Mark. I guess there was, how do you see the role of enterprises in the space evolving? You know, that's one of the questions. So why don't we go with that? Yeah.
So it's you know, I was in the space early on at Microsoft a couple of years ago. It is like night and day now. We're seeing, and really just in the last like 6 months or so, I think with all the interest and activity and excitement in the DeFi space, we've seen a bunch of folks sort of move into both, whether it's for DeFi or for NFTs. I think it's driven a lot of folks to move more into that sort of crypto-friendly enterprise category. I think, you know, if you look at your B2C enterprise, you mentioned Twitter earlier, there are a number of folks there where they're looking at sort of bringing Web3 to their Web2 properties, and adding, you know, incremental things to start with, but have bigger plans. And then for enterprises, you know, getting into DeFi, and, you know, we have a product, MetaMask Institutional, which people really are liking at the moment. But lots of interest and opportunities there. And I've had multiple very large companies that in the past may have been fairly skeptical. They now need to have a Web3 strategy. And so I think, and it's coming from like the CEO level. And so to me, that's like indicative it's going to be a moment. I think, you know, pay attention to what folks are doing in the verifiable credential space in enterprise. There's some great technology that people have built around that is, I've seen firsthand and have actually worked on some demos that make it super easy to make it, you know, 2 clicks on your phone and you now have verifiable credentials and you're using them in other places. So really interesting stuff that's happening there. And then on the permission networks, we're seeing, you know, a renewed interest in exploration there. It will be interesting how that space continues to evolve, and, you know, whether we're seeing layer 2s and side chains there, and how those get set up. I think the biggest issues historically have been just getting that consortium started, and you know, you may see some people get into the space and say, hey, we'll do this chain for the industry, and maybe monetize or do things in different ways that I think will make it easier for them to get in, and remove some of the friction of what we've seen in the last couple of years. But lots of interest there, lots of interest.
Evan, can you post post your Twitter handle to everyone? I think you just posted it to just a small group. So, and then week in eea-eth news, but just post your handle to everyone in the chat, and they'll get that. And then if you want to, while you're doing that, give your final thoughts on the road ahead and the road into 2022.
Yeah, well, I was going to echo something about enterprise, which I think is happening, is that I hate username and password. Like this whole Web2 experience, I've always found it really annoying. Then you have to recover your things. Then frankly, like sometimes corporations won't even let me back into my account if I haven't used it for a while. So I logged into like a Microsoft Hotmail account that I hadn't used for a long time. And it was, I'd moved, and I had the right password, and they wouldn't let me in. They wouldn't let me in. I never got control of that account again, because they wanted to like confirm by sending an email to some other email that I don't use, and they wouldn't let me in. Like I lost control. So I think that sign on with Ethereum, like people using Ethereum keys, is a much better user experience. And there's obviously some issues there with key management, but I think that's going to be a trend that we're actually going to see like used in like some Web 2 products that are going to start offering it. And, you know, I don't know, I personally am excited about that because, you know, as I said, like, I don't even own my Hotmail account because if I stop using it for a year, Hotmail won't let me use it anymore. I had the same experience with a Twitter account as well, where you know, it was a political account and it had like 30,000 followers, but I didn't use it for a year. And now Twitter won't let me use it, even though I know the username and password and got it on the first try. So I'm excited about signing on with Ethereum keys.
Yeah,
ownership matters.
yeah, it was pretty interesting with ENS. I've got multiple accounts, you know, with them, and then, you know, you just sign into the different accounts, and it pops and it populates data from that Ethereum account, and it's pretty game changing when you realize, oh, I actually own the data, and I'm bringing the data with me to the site, and now I'm giving you permission to access that. And then you can segregate that data the way you want it. So pretty powerful. Mark, do you want to any 2-second final words?
Just get ready. I think next year for this audience, it's going to be exciting. There's a lot of stuff is coming together, and it's going to be easier to build on it than ever. So get ready. It's here. I've been talking about it for a while now, but everything is converging, and next year is going to be the year.
Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate Mark, Evan. Thank you for spending the hour with us. And enjoyed the conversation and your words. So Brittany, do you want to any final words and wrap us up?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, thank you, Evan and Mark, for joining us today. I did place your social media handles that you sent over in the chat so all attendees can follow your work. For additional information about joining the EEA, please reach out to membership@eea-eth-alliance.org or visit our public website. You can also join the EEA on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. All that's been posted in the chat for you. Thank you again, and this concludes today's EEA Education Series webinar.